Hi, and welcome to this week's Quantum Alignment Show. I am Karen Curry Parker, and I'm so excited to be exploring the sixth part of our six-part series, Reclaiming Your Inner Child by Design. We're going to be talking today about a very special type in human design, our reflector types. These are sometimes the type that we call our shiny unicorns because they are so rare and so very, very precious, and understanding the nature of this type is very important when you are parenting a reflector or if you yourself are a reflector. We've been exploring the theme of reclaiming your inner child basically by revisiting the understanding and information about type. As we go through this information and we explore your type, or maybe the type of your child, I want to be really, really clear that we're not parent blaming. Most of our parents, if not all of our parents, didn't have human design as a tool. And many parents were taught to raise children in kind of a one-size-fits-all model. If you read Dr. Spock, which hopefully your parents didn't read Dr. Spock because that was a long, long time ago, and I don't think actually it was the best parenting information. But if you pick up any parenting book, you're going to find that there's sort of a formulaic approach to parenting, and certainly there are certain key elements in parenting that are universal. But in reality, every kid is different. And we know from human design a lot more detail about how every kid is different. So when you're raising children, as parents, you're not only raising your unique child, but you're also raising your unique child in the context of the energy field of your family and in the context of how you and your unique child are being impacted by each other's charts, and of course, many other factors that we bring into the parenting relationship, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I want to look at this presentation, our final presentation, and all of the presentations, if you're watching the replays. I want you to look at this not as oh my gosh, this is how my parents screwed up, but more looking at this in terms of this is why I might have cultivated some of the patterns that I have, or even some of the pains that I have around how I am or who I am, because my energy field wasn't understood. I did not get those things that I needed that made me unique. And certainly when we're talking about uniqueness, and the reflector, we're talking about a type that is very, very different from the other types. Let's get started. And I just want to review for you guys, and some of you who've been watching this series, this is review, but it's always good to review it. Or if you're new to this series, this is very important information. I find that sometimes when we talk about this information, that my clients or my students, every once in a while someone will get triggered. So just be mindful. That triggering oftentimes is it's grief. It's sadness that you didn't feel while you were growing up, that you could be seen or that you could be fully expressing who you are in your family. And that's true, I think, to a certain degree for most of us, and certainly for many of us, it's very true and can be deeply painful. When we look at a child as a parent, when you are looking at your child, if you can imagine for a minute that you're looking through a window and that window has 4 panes, there are 4 very important perspectives that you have to take into context when you are exploring how to raise your child and how to see the truth of who your child really is. Obviously, that first window pane is human design. Each child has a different type, a different chart configuration, and that chart configuration tells you a lot about what does this child need to grow up feeling strong and powerful and resilient and healthy and dynamic and connect to the truth of who they are. The second window pane that you have to look at as a parent, and when I created the quantum alignment system, which is an integrated healing system that is based in human design, when I created the quantum alignment system, a lot of what I did was incorporate into assessments of people's pains the idea that along different child developmental phases, there are specific needs that children need. As children are growing up at different key developmental stages, they have tasks, emotional, spiritual, physical, psychological tasks that they have to master in order to grow into the next level of resilience and health as children. And if they're not supported in appropriately living and growing through these phases, what oftentimes will happen is we'll hold on to that pain or hold on to that place where we didn't get to complete the developmental task, and it'll become part of our unhealthy patterns and our unhealthy behavioral challenges or relationship challenges later on in life. So let me give you an example, because I think sometimes this can be sort of obtuse. Every child goes through actually two very important developmental cycles where they learn how to be powerful. So that happens at the age of 2, around 2 to 5-ish. And children don't follow timelines as well as I think people think they do. So it's ish in terms of timelines. And then a second phase around young adolescence, about 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. During this cycle, when they're learning about their power, children can be a little bit challenging to parents. A toddler going through this cycle is going to say that word that we always associate with 2-year-olds, right? They're going to learn to say no. And they need to learn to say no at that age. First of all, learning to say no is an important skill set. I cannot tell you how many adults I coach on teaching them how to say no, right? When you don't learn how to appropriately say no, it becomes very difficult to say no when you're an adult. So when a child, a 2-year-old, learns to say no, and starts to power struggle, first of all, as a parent, that's something to celebrate. That means, hey, my kid is growing. They're developing a sense of their own power, and that's pretty cool to watch. Conversely, your challenge then as a parent becomes learning how to appropriately support that child and learning how to engage in appropriate power. That doesn't mean they get to rule the roost. That doesn't mean they get to set bedtime or tell you what they're going to eat necessarily, although they will. It means that you as a parent have to work in collaboration with your child to find ways to help them be empowered. It might mean that you let them choose between green and red pants, right? Or you let them choose what kind of toothpaste they want, or you give them a plant that they can water. Or 2-year-olds love light switches, right? Let them turn the light on and off. These are very empowering things for 2-year-olds. But if they don't get that opportunity to learn how to be powerful correctly and appropriately, they will either learn to power struggle as a way of getting power inappropriately, and oftentimes can carry that into the next developmental cycle when they do power again as young teenagers. And if they don't learn to be appropriately powerful at that stage, then sometimes, and many of us have had this experience, we carry that need for power and express that need for power in very unhealthy ways later on as adults. So knowing where your child is developmentally is very, very important, because it helps you tailor your parenting in such a way that you're supporting your child and mastering their developmental needs at specific key phases in their lives. The next window pane that you're going to be looking at when you explore your child or you look at your child is going to be your own personal conditioning. We bring our own stories into the parenting relationship, our own experiences as children, the way our parents behaved. And here's a classic example. It's very common, I find, when I coach parents, for parents who are very permissive as parents to have been raised in an environment where perhaps their parents were very, very strict and very authoritarian. So that authoritarian power system in a parenting model can make children grow up to say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the opposite. And truth is, permissive parenting or very laissez-faire parenting is also actually not very healthy for children. So swinging back and forth from generation to generation can create a really difficult dynamic sometimes in family patterns, intergenerational family patterns. So you're going to bring your own stuff to the table. And certainly I would say parenting offers us the most important opportunity to heal our own inner child and do our own inner work so that we can decrease the amount of painful conditioning or unhealthy conditioning to the parenting arena, so that we are being pure stewards for the unfolding of our children as best as we can in the healthiest way possible when we engage in our parenting relationships. Lastly, but not least, when everybody has energy needs, even manifestors. Every type in human design, every unique chart has its own configuration, and every chart has its own need for specific kinds of energy. When we don't learn to get our energy needs met in a healthy way, we devolve sometimes into mischief or misbehavior. And by the way, we do this both as children and adults. If you've ever taken my Transform Your Relationship program, we go into great detail around what goes on in the chart and how the configurations of the chart create specific energy needs and mistaken motivations, and how those energy dynamics in partnership create problems in relationships. So I'll give you again an example. If you have an undefined or non-motorized throat, and meaning if you're a projector, a generator, or a reflector, and we're going to talk about reflectors today, you have a high need for recognition and attention. You need it to feel heard. You need it to feel seen and to feel loved. If you don't learn how to get that need met, or if nobody ever helped you learn to get that need met, if nobody ever gave you the right kind of recognition and attention, you may have learned, or you may have grown up trying to get attention in inappropriate ways that oftentimes can annoy people and push them away, or manipulate people and make them feel depleted and exhausted because you're not living out your need for attention in a healthy way. So that mistaken motivation, that mischief that you create to get access to energy and attention, sometimes creates problematic dynamics in relationships. So we have to look at the question, why do children misbehave? And when we're looking at children, our children, other people's children, we go to the grocery store and we see children, and children aren't behaving, we have a tendency to think that they're misbehaving because they're spoiled. Your parents just don't take care of you and set boundaries and do the right thing. We think they're misbehaving because they're bad. Well, your parents haven't taught you the right way to do stuff, right? We think, oh, they're just like their mother or their father. That's really a thought you oftentimes will have a lot when you're raising your own children. Oh, you're just like your dad, right? We think that they misbehave because they're jealous, needy, clingy, whiny. Listen to the things we say about small children when they get a newborn sibling, and we have really weird things that we say about them, right? Of course they're clingy and whiny. They're questioning their lovability, and you need to reconfirm for them that they are indeed lovable. Or we'll say they have ADD or some other psychological issue, which they might actually have, and sometimes they don't. I think if you really look at the diagnosis rate, or you look at teachers that will tell you your kid has ADD, a teacher is not a psychologist or psychiatrist. They cannot diagnose learning disabilities. So, sometimes we throw that out very loosely without really trying to see what's going on here. Obviously, in all of this, if we have any of these belief systems, invariably the component here is that you have a child that's misbehaving because you have a parent that's not doing their job, right? But here's the real reason why children misbehave. As we said, when we looked at mistaken motivations in the window pane, children misbehave because they have unmet energy needs, and they're learning to express their needs. Your job as a parent is to teach your child how to get those needs met appropriately. Standing on the coffee table and shrieking when you need recognition and attention works, but it's not appropriate. So your role as the parent becomes to support your child in learning how to appropriately get those needs met. Children need, at the core, at the heart of who they are, they need to feel lovable. They need to feel powerful and capable. They need to experiment and explore, and they need attention. And when they get their needs met appropriately, and by the way, nobody's going to get this 100% of the time if you're a parent. You also have to recognize you have needs too, and there's always a delicate balance and a dance. So I would love to invite you, if you're parenting right now, if you're not getting your own need for self-care met, and this is crucial, when you are not getting your own self-care needs met, when your cup is not full, it's very difficult for you to support your children to get their needs met too, because you're going to be reactive, because you're going to be tired and depleted. So self-care is actually the very first thing that every parent needs in spades. And I think we have to really work to facilitate that for our young parents especially, and really make sure that they get the community support that they need so they can be more deliberate and conscious and present to their children instead of being exhausted and reactive. Every child is going to get their energy needs met in a different way depending on their human design, obviously their unique energy blueprint. So let's begin the process of exploring what actually makes a reflector a reflector. The reflector chart is going to look very different than most of the other charts you see. What you're going to notice when you see a reflector chart is that the reflector chart is completely open. There are no defined channels. There are no defined centers. You only have gate definition. So when you understand the nature of openness in a chart, anything that's white in a chart is where you're taking energy and information in. Not only are you taking energy and information in, you're amplifying it. So whatever you're experiencing in that openness, you're experiencing it in a very big way. I think sometimes when we talk about reflectors, there's kind of a mythology around, oh, the reflector is this really soft empath that sort of cringes in the corner. And certainly every once in a while, I'll find some reflector energy that is expressed that way. But for the most part, what I find is here we have a type that has the potential to amplify almost all of the human condition and to express it, to embody it, to reflect it back out in this very, very, very intense way. So oftentimes what I hear most commonly from parents who are raising reflectors is that these are very intense children, and they can be intense emotionally, they can be intense physically, they can be intense even in their sensitivity. They're not going to just experience something, a little bit. They're going to experience everything in a big, big way. One of my very dearest friends has a reflector daughter, and this daughter was so attuned to energy that before major events would happen, terrible, tragic events would happen in her community, and she lived in Boston. When she was little, she felt the energy of the Boston marathon bombing like several days before it actually happened. She started to get very upset and agitated, and working with her daughter and exploring why is this child experiencing everything so deeply has been really a lifelong journey for this beautiful woman and her young daughter. Her daughter's now a teenager. Learning how to really process and experience this openness in a way that doesn't derail and tank you all the time. So it's really beautiful to understand that openness and the intensity of it. Here's the other piece that we sometimes don't talk about with the reflector. Every time you have openness, when you grow and you mature and as you understand the world, that openness becomes wisdom. It becomes awareness of potential. That's why our manifestors and our projectors in particular with their open sacrals, they become very wise about workforce and life force energy. That sacral energy is that place where that workforce and life force energy happens. And that's, for the projector especially, that's what they're here to manage and guide. And their wisdom comes from their openness. When we look at the reflector, we're looking at an energy type that has a deep internal visceral embodiment of the potential for humanity and to live in the world with the awareness of the potential and to see the reality of maybe where we're not quite living up to the potential can be very challenging for reflectors and reflectors children, or reflectors when they become teenagers and become so much more conscious of, hey, we could do something about this, and yet the world isn't quite moving towards that potential in the way that the reflector can see. So it's a very, very powerful, very important, but also very intense configuration. We know from what we've been talking about that each energy type, if we're going to put on a show, plays a role. The reflector's role is to be the wise observer. They're like the audience in the show, right? They're watching, they're magnifying and reflecting the experience of being at the show. And they're applauding or crying or being happy or being bored and fanning their faces and thinking about how can I get out of this program, right? They are magnifying and reflecting all that is around them and mirroring it back for others. That's a very, very unique and special role and vital role. Reflectors are, to a certain degree, lunar beings, meaning their entire way that they operate is influenced by the moon. So when we talk about strategy for the reflectors, they have to wait 28 days or one lunar cycle. And part of why they have to wait to make decisions, they need so much time for these decisions, is because they need time, first of all, to sort out all the different energies inside of them and to see what is mine and what is not mine. And that's a really good thing for all of us with any kind of openness, and that's all of us, to really explore what is going on inside of me in my openness that might be causing me to react, and how can I get clear about which energies I'm experiencing that are mine or not mine. So that time sort of builds in a little bit of a buffer for that. The second thing that happens for the reflector is because there is no inner authority like there are for the other types, that inner authority really comes from time, and that's it, and time to sort through things and time to talk through things, because the inner connection to self isn't the same for the reflector as it can be for the other types. So the reflector needs, over the course of this 28 days, space to have sounding boards in their lives. We talked about this a little bit with projectors. Same thing for reflectors. They need people in their lives who can just sit and be present to their talking, who can hear them talk through their choices and kind of mirror back to the reflector, a little bit of a flipper roll here, to mirror back to the reflector what the reflector is saying. Again, when you're working as a sounding board for a reflector or a projector, they don't need advice. You think they do. They think they do, because they don't get that they don't need advice. But they need sounding boards. They need people who can really, really just give them the space to unpack everything that's going on internally. So just learning to listen and holding loving space for your reflector is huge. The third thing that happens for the reflector is, if you look at the reflector chart, because they're lunar beings, their charts are going to change depending on the movement of the moon. So the moon, over the course of 28 to 29 days, it transits through all of the 64 gates in the human design chart. And as it lights up each one of those gates, it impacts the reflector chart. And sometimes that impact creates a change in the definition. It doesn't mean that the natal chart changes, but the reflector is deeply impacted on a transitory level by the movement of the moon. And helping a reflector master their or memorize their cycle, their lunar cycle, and how it impacts their chart. And it's going to be different for each reflector. So if you are a reflector, get a reading, because you really need to understand your cycle. And if you're raising a reflector, get a reading, because you really need to understand their cycles. You know that you've got a specific cycle, transitory cycle that progresses over the course of every 28 to 29 days that impacts the chart differently. So here we have a reflector chart. This is day 1 of the reflector cycle, and it doesn't matter what day you start measuring the cycle. If you're a reflector, you can start today and call today day 1. In this particular chart, the moon is transiting through the gate 15. Gives the reflector the full definition through the transit in the gate 15, starting the channel 15.5, which brings for the reflector on that particular day during that particular lunar transit a defined G and a defined sacral, which means on day 1, this reflector might have a different sense of direction and a different capacity to harness the energy towards fulfilling that direction. On day 2, the moon is in the gate 53, so that gives the channel 5342 definition. In this particular slide, the sacral should also be defined, by the way. So it's going to give this reflector sacral energy, workforce energy, and root energy, which can sometimes feel like a lot of energy, and sometimes it can feel really sluggish. It just depends on how the energy flow is. So understanding that on day 2, you still have that sacral energy. On day 3, in the transits, there's no change in the chart. Day 4, same thing. So knowing your schedule, because it's going, once you understand how the cycle works, it stays consistent, because the moon transits consistently through all the gates in the same pattern every 28 to 29 days. But knowing how the reflector chart changes is hugely important for the reflector to understand how they're going to feel and what energy they have available to them as part of the decision-making process and as part of the process of knowing how their energy works. The reflector emotional theme is disappointment. And the disappointment for the reflector comes from having that internal sense of what's possible from all of that openness, knowing the potential, and then seeing what is not perhaps being manifested through people's choices and behavior. So it can be disappointing. The second source of disappointment for the reflector can also be not having had enough time. We live in a very time pressured culture. And when you need a month or two sometimes to make a good decision, it can be very, very challenging. So my oldest stepdaughter is a reflector and she's an actor. And she will go to an audition, right? And she'll audition for a part. She's in graduate school in Temple University right now. And she goes to her auditions, the next day, they're going to give her a call back, right? They're going to say, hey, we want you to come back. We want to see you perform again. Or they may even tell her, you got the part. Now, as a reflector, she needs time to feel her way into, is this the right part for me? Do I want this part? Am I going to be part of this production? And so she can't call up the producer of the show and say, I really love this opportunity. Thank you so much. I need a month or two to sleep, to talk it through and to feel my way into it. By the time, first of all, if she says that, they're going to roll their eyes and think she's flaky. And secondly, production is going to be probably halfway over by the time she gets clarity as to whether she really wanted to do it or not. So on a certain level, that actually creates not only disappointment, but actually stress for her, because she is constantly in situations and circumstances that don't work for her very well, that aren't necessarily optimal and ideal. And because of that, she's disappointed because she has these opportunities that she has to take because of the time pressure, and she can't necessarily wait out her cycle to make sure those are the right decisions. I like to call the reflector the calibrator, because it's through the reflection of the human condition and the human potential that we can gauge where we are at collectively. The role of the reflector is to reflect the health of the community that they're living in. So when the reflector is happy, or when the calibrator is happy and feeling good and really enthusiastic and excited about their life, it's because they're living in a community that's bringing them the potential for that energy. That's what they're experiencing as a result of being in the community that they're in. The disappointment then, when you understand that, becomes witnessing the unfulfilled potential and the need for more time. And of course, the challenge for the reflector is to have the courage to remove themselves out of communities that feel misaligned. And that's hard for the reflector, because they become, to a certain degree, who they're with. And they don't necessarily make change very easily, because they love to have people they know very deeply around them, because the consistency of knowing other people's energy fields or other people's auras gives them a certain amount of stability when the rest of their chart is changing so much all the time with the moon and depending on who they're with. And they need to know that if they take their time, everything is going to be okay. The spiritual role of the calibrator is the barometer for the evolution of the planet. In my perfect world, if I was running the world, we would know where all the reflectors are, and we would be looking to the reflectors to see, how are we doing? How close are we to creating an equitable, sustainable world of peace? Challenges for the reflector, or contemplations for you if you are a reflector, or things to support your reflector child in contemplating is, can I be who I am, or am I merged? And of course, it's a little bit messy with the reflector, because the reflector is who they are, that they're supposed to be merged, but finding those places inside of them where they can simply be the reflection rather than to define themselves by doing and all the other things that are intricately interwoven into our cultural identity. It's not that they aren't here to do things. They can be very, very powerful, just like many other open types. We always think openness equals not powerful. Actually, remember that openness amplifies. So the potential for the reflector especially is to be incredibly, incredibly powerful. And that the challenge then is to extricate yourself from the merging sometimes, especially if you're not in the right place and you're experiencing a community that feels very misaligned for you. And of course, recognizing that disappointment can sometimes keep you from being yourself, that the pressure and the disappointment or the fear of being disappointed, and not recognizing that the best way to combat the disappointment is to give yourself the time when you're a reflector, or if you're raising a reflector child, to recognize that they need time. They need time to decide things like, should I do football this year or not? Or should I be in this play or not? And as a parent, facilitating time and timing as best as you can for your reflector until they can really get a hold of this for themselves is huge. And when they don't get that time or that timing, or they're under that much pressure to make those decisions in this high speed, high pressurized way that we tend to do in our culture, it keeps them from being who they are and keeps them from being present to what they're here to do. Challenges for the reflector include not having access to sustainable energy. They can be very, very powerful, but remember, wherever you have openness in the chart is where you're designed to amplify, but not hold on to energy. So you can't hold on to the energies in your openness. You can experience them. But if you try to become them, if you try to hold on to them, you run the risk of frying your circuitry and burning yourself out. So reflectors, just like projectors and manifestors with that open sacral, they need rest cycles. Their energy can be very inconsistent depending on who they're with and the cycles of the moon, as we talked about. They need time, and they need people who love them to have the time. You can't put pressure on them because you're impatient, because you have a different set of timing or different sense of timing than your reflector child. They oftentimes will struggle to differentiate, and this becomes very, very important when we start to look at peer groups and who your reflector is hanging out with, making sure that your reflector is in a community that supports the values of your family and is really lifting your reflector child up. And of course, recognizing and helping your reflector understand that even in more intimate partnerships, relationships, particularly when they start dating when they're teenagers, that they can really merge into those relationships deeply. And certainly I would say all of the reflectors that I know have many, many, many lifelong friendships that endure because they can be so present and so involved in all relationships. But when it comes time to romantic partnerships, especially when those romantic partnerships maybe aren't healthy, or they break up, because sometimes it just happens, right? People grow apart, they need to go on, that extricating the energy out and differentiating can be really, really painful for the reflector. The reflector needs consistency and familiarity because so much is changeable in their experience of the world. The consistency and familiarity feels good. They can be, because of the need for consistency and familiarity, somewhat slow to adapt. A reflector needs a lot of stability in the change-making process. So taking giant leaps sometimes really isn't comfortable for a lot of reflectors. And they also need to have consistent auras, which means, making changes that involve changing friends groups, like let's say you move, or even more dramatic changes like getting divorced, having your parents get divorced, can be a very difficult situation for a reflector to adapt to. They oftentimes will feel very different. Reflectors know they're different. They don't know why they're different. When I do readings for them, they're like, hallelujah, I finally understand, right? Because they can be very different from other people. And because they have this open G and they're here to reflect the health of a community, right place is paramount for a reflector. So when you are a reflector, or you have been a reflector in the wrong place and you couldn't get out of that place, maybe because your parents brought you there, being in the wrong place can be very difficult for a reflector, because then you're embodying a place that isn't your place to be in, and nothing works, nothing feels right, nothing feels good. The parenting challenge when you are raising a reflector is to learn to give your reflector time to choose, and for you to be patient so that your reflector can see what does patience look like. Our children are watching us, and it's not enough to say, oh, be patient, if you yourself are not embodying patience and showing your reflector what that looks like. You have to help your child learn how to be aware of themselves and others in a healthy way. So dialoguing with your reflector is so powerful, and it's really lovely because they can dialogue and they like to dialogue. They need to dialogue. So giving, especially, if you have the ability to do this, giving your reflector child once a day sort of a check-in point when they get home from school, for example, where you guys just sit and talk and let your reflector talk and let them kind of process their day and who they're with and what's going on with them and how they feel that day, is hugely important. You want to support them in managing their energy, meaning you want to teach your reflector children how their chart changes and what that means so that they start to understand their cycle and really also understand how they need to really manage their energy in a way that keeps them sustainable, which means they need rest cycles. They need to be, you as a parent need to be consistent and available. That a reflector child really needs, again, that consistency and that stability and that availability. It takes a little bit of an extra kind of special energy to raise a reflector child and to raise them in a healthy way so that they have that soft landing place that they know they can trust when so much of what's going on inside of them is changeable. And of course, giving them insights and helping them understand their unique role in the world, to help them understand their mirrors for what's happening in the world, and that they are oftentimes feeling inside of themselves things that other people might even be denying. That's not true. You can't feel that way. That's not right. But yet they know it is because they can feel it inside of themselves, and teaching them to trust themselves in their own inner experience of what they are feeling and embodying in their bodies. Reflectors need a lot of alone time, but not so much alone time that they're not part of a community, because they absolutely need to be part of a community. But they need that alone time to decompress all of that energy. They need to have a consistent peer group. And if they change peer groups or they move or they make big shifts, then, it takes them a while to adjust to those shifts. And until they adjust to those shifts, they're going to feel very out of place and they're going to want to go back to where they were before. They need time, and they also need to learn how to experience discernment. It's very easy when you're a reflector, because you can experience so much inside of yourself, to fall in love with people's potential. And knowing how to discern what you're experiencing and really rectifying what you feel versus what you actually see somebody doing is crucial for the reflector. The reflector needs to know that people can all feel beautiful. They probably do to the reflector, but they might not all be acting beautifully, and to know the difference between the two. So I always teach anybody that has a lot of openness, reflectors in particular, to be a screen but not a sponge, meaning don't absorb the world around you, but notice it, be present to it, let it flow through you as part of your awareness. Don't become it. Let it flow through you. Let yourself be aware of it, but don't hold on to it. That's very tricky for a reflector, because the reflector, to a certain degree, is designed to become the energy of the place that they're in. But recognizing when they start to not feel okay, that that's a symptom of the place that they're at, not a personal problem that they're having. They need to be in the right place. And if your reflector is struggling, it may be that they're in the wrong place. And certainly I would say look around and see if there's any part of your reflector's life that can be changed, that can be facilitated to make the place better. Maybe they're in the wrong classroom with the wrong teacher. Maybe they're sitting in the wrong place in the classroom. Maybe they're in the wrong school. There might be ways that you can shift some of the place that they're at to facilitate for them being in a better place. And of course, they need lots of love, to know that love is the gold standard, the baseline that they should be expecting in their experience of the world. And that's really true for all children, frankly. I wish we could do a better job collectively of facilitating that for all of our children. Reflectors need to sleep like all open sacral beings, just like manifestors and projectors. They need to go to bed and lie down before they're tired. And they do better if they can sleep alone, if possible. In relationships, reflectors have to master learning the difference between their own energy and their partner's energy. Being codependent or having codependent relationships patterns is pretty common for reflectors, and learning how to know who is you in the relationship and who your partner is, and not being merged, is a very big challenge and an important part of a reflector learning how to form a healthy relationship. Again, remembering that even to form a relationship, to get into a relationship, a reflector needs a lot of time. A reflector should not fall in love at first sight and make a decision based on that initial experience. Remember too that your experience of your partner is changeable depending on how your chart changes. So again, for reflectors, they need time to feel their way into the right relationships. a reflector in a relationship is going to do a lot of talking. They need to talk. They need attention and recognition because that's how they get heard, and they need that sounding board to be able to support them in making good and healthy decisions. And as we talked about dependency, they need the consistency of relationship. They do well in the consistency of relationship. They need auras that they depend on, and this is important not only for romantic relationships, but even in parenting. Sometimes, when a reflector leaves home, they don't want to leave home. They like home. They want to come back home because they like the consistency of knowing what to expect from these auras that they understand. And as we talked about, they can do a lot of talking, and that talking is necessary. It's how they talk through what's good and right and correct for them. If you love a reflector, you want to give them time. You want to be consistent as a parent so that they know that when you're going to be available and what the pattern is, and to know that that's an unchangeable thing. You want to let your reflector be with you. This is not a child that's going to want to go do their own thing all the time. They're going to want to come back and touch base with you because they need that consistency. You want to let them be with the people that they love. Don't try to remove them from their peer group or their friends, unless, of course, they're not healthy. But, they're best friends, and their deep, deep bonded friendships are very, very important to them. My oldest stepdaughter never comes to dinner without bringing her very best friend, who she's been friends with for like almost 2 decades now. They are very, very deeply bonded, those two. And, it's unfair of us to expect that our daughter would show up without her bestie, because she needs the people that she loves. You want to make sure that you help them find a place that feels good. If they don't feel good where they are, they're not in the right place, and that's not healthy for them. And teach them the difference between you and them, giving them insights into how they are versus how the people they're with are, and helping them discern from the very beginning of their lives how to tell the difference between me and not me. And honestly, the most important piece is recognizing that time will reveal the answer to that, and to not fall in love with potential, and to let your children take the time that they need to feel their way into the right friendships or not. Because the sacral is open, we're looking at a type that does not have consistent sexual energy. And so meaning sometimes they can be very sexual, sometimes they can be asexual, and sometimes the expression of sexual energy can be variable. So, there's a lot of potential here for sexual fluidity, for a lot of different variations of how sexual energy can be experienced. And it's all normal for the reflector. But again, helping your reflector, especially your teenager, understand that a lot of times their sexual experience is going to be influenced by who they're with, not themselves. So helping them get clarity again that they better be enjoying their sexual partner, because their partner is the one that's bringing that energy to the table. And if they're not having a good experience, to recognize that it might not be the right partner. Again, open sacrals don't have consistent workforce energy. So building into your life cycle the need for rest, wealth cycles that involve creating pockets of savings so that if you need a down cycle or a rest cycle, you have the funding to support yourself. I always tell reflectors from the very, when they're young, no matter what, always sock as much money as you can away, because when you save money, when you can sock away that money, you'll have a cushion for if you hit a burnout, which is not unusual for a reflector, or when you need a rest cycle. Reflectors, to stay healthy, need a good, healthy community. Their health is going to be influenced by the health of their community. They need to wait. They need to understand that they will be healthier if they give themselves the time to make the decisions that they need to make. Again, with work, they need to know that they're not here to work traditionally, and that it's okay for them to create a work style that involves pauses and breaks and respite. And of course, because they have an open sacral, not knowing when enough is part of the theme of all types with open sacrals, including the reflector. And of course, when we're raising reflectors, that means sometimes helping them ratchet it back so that it's not too much, or in terms of health or behaviors, recognizing when enough is important. And that means enough work, enough diet style, enough energy style work, exercise, even the right relationships, the right times, knowing when is enough to make time to make a decision. So recognizing maybe if a career isn't correct and it's time to be done with it, or a decision isn't correct and it's time to be done with it. When a relationship isn't correct, it's time to be done with it. Reflectors need support sometimes in seeing when enough is enough. And again, if you love a reflector, giving them the space to talk and helping them create for themselves a space where they can unpack and process everything that they're experiencing is crucial. This is the last of this series, Healing Your Inner Child by Human Design. I hope you saw yourself in these lessons. I hope you learned a lot about who you are. I hope you got a deeper sense of what's possible for you. I hope if you're a parent that maybe you learned more about your child and how you can better support your child in being the person they were born to be. I always believe that as parents, we're sacred stewards for the unfolding of our children. They don't need us to form them. They're already perfectly formed. They need us to create the space within which they can unfold into the truth of who they are with joy and ease and with a deep sense of their own value and their lovability. So I hope you got at least some beginning understandings on how you can better see your child for who they are and love yourself for who you are as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend and be well.